everyone. Welcome to Keto and Crime. It is Thursday, May 9th. I am here to go over what happened yesterday, Wednesday, May 8th, in the Daybell trial. My name is Tracy. Welcome to my channel. I do true crime, dark history, horror movie reviews. And the Daybell case is one that I have done a lot of deep dives and research. There's over 150 videos about it on my channel, including complete reviews of everybody and any books that they've written that is connected to this case. I have followed the trial of 𝗚𝗏. I reported on it each day, just like I'm doing here. I try to condense 6 to 8 hours of testimony into as small a chunk as I can, hitting the highlights. And for those that can't listen to the streams or the audio recordings every day, I do have a day job, so I listen to it when I can, and otherwise I take, I also listen to other people's breakdowns, and I read the notes from the East Idaho News, but mostly I'm listening to it, taking notes throughout my day as I work. So I'm here to break it down for you, and thank you, welcome. I hope I earn your subscription today. I apologize. We've been through some severe weather here. I live in the deep south, and all the weather has got allergy pollen just kicked up, and I am suffering. I feel exhausted today. I don't know what is wrong, but if it's okay with you, just today, you will see me sipping on my coffee throughout this just to get my blood pumping. So let's go ahead and dive into what happened on Wednesday, May 8th, in the Daybell trial. Court begins just before 9 o'clock local time. We are back with Dr. Garth Warren still being questioned by Rob Wood. He is the technician that completed the excavated autopsies on the children, JJ and 𝗙𝗶𝗁. He began his testimony on Tuesday the 7th, and now we are continuing. He went into a little more detail about JJ's remains on Tuesday, and now we're talking about 𝗙𝗶𝗁. Wood asked Warren how he received 𝗙𝗁's remains, and he said in multiple bags. They were 2 black body bags that were sealed. There was also a brown paper bag with multiple bags inside. All of the bags were x-rayed. There were 28 x-rays in total. They were looking for projectiles, weapon fragments. They saw multiple bones and a lot of debris from the burial. So mud, rock, pebbles, that sort of thing. Wood then asks about the breakdown of the tissue. He said most of 𝗙𝗁's was skeletal. It had been partially burned and a lot of decomposition. There were some internal. This is difficult to talk about, y'all, and a lot of the jurors had a hard time with it. So a lot of the pictures that were shown, they cut the stream to the projector screen, so they couldn't be shown live, and they were only showed to people in the courtroom. So this was a lot of tense stuff. So if this is not your jam, I suggest skipping this summary altogether because it's mostly forensics. They were able to identify a few of her organs, like her heart, her lungs, portion of her liver, 1 kidney, and some small brain tissue, as well as some skin. They were all charred and shriveled. Warren says that there were pieces of her skull and skull fragments, foot bones, sternum bones, hip bones, and other bones were identified. They were all blackened and had been burned. He sent the skeletal muscle for toxicology testing. It came back positive for ibuprofen, caffeine, low levels of carbon monoxide. There was nothing poisonous in that. I mean, yes, carbon monoxide, but that could also be produced post-mortem. And then they talk more about JJ. They admit photos of JJ's autopsy. Again, this is where they cut the feed. The feed takes place in 4 separate screens. There's defense table, prosecution table, judge, and court reporter. And then there is the projection screen where all the exhibits are shown. So it's a 4-screen split on the live streams, and they cut the projector screen. So we're just seeing the people now. And so they start talking about the photos, and they talk about the black body bag, the tarp that was under the body bag, the multiple strips of duct tape, Warren describes what he saw when he opened the bag, how he cut the remains out and what he looked at. He also showed the remains, which, I've seen them online, but with the red pajama top and bottom, and basically how the body looked when he got it. Remember, JJ was taken in one piece, whereas 𝗠𝗨, they did 𝗠𝗨 wrong. And then they show more close-ups of the bodies, particularly where his ankles were bound with duct tape, the arms were bound with duct tape, the duct tape around the mouth, and then they show multiple angles of all of this. So they're just seeing picture after picture of this carnage. And then it shows everything as they start to take it apart. They remove the duct tape so they can do the examination, and as they do that, they lay the components out, the tarp, the tape, the clothing, anything that is removed, they lay those out and take more pictures so that they can document that they had everything, that this is correct, and there's no reason for appeal on basis of evidence being manipulated. And then they talk about how they removed the duct tape. The jury is visibly disturbed. There are several of them crying, looking down. It's hard for them to look at it. And now we're down to 17 jurors because one juror was sick last week and was actually dismissed. So now we're down to 17, which means that, they're going to have to shift around when they actually send people to deliberate. Then there's a picture of the disposable diaper that JJ was wearing. Remember, even though he was a big boy, he still needed some help. And then they show a close-up of his face with the duct tape. And then again, after the duct tape was removed, the jurors are really having a hard time. Then Warren explains how he was looking for any signs of trauma that may explain how he died. He said there was bruising on the upper right arm. He took sections of the area, looked at them under a microscope. He said it was a true hemorrhage, which means it was actually busted blood vessels. So it was definitely the force. In his opinion, the cause of it was trauma. And then he talks about some of the other testing he did. He looked at some of the scratches that were on JJ, the bruise on his thumb, and also the scratch-like abrasions on his neck and jaw. Then they show a picture of some of that. Warren then says that the abrasions could have been from someone putting the bag over JJ's head, or JJ trying to get the bag off his head. I wasn't there. I don't know. But these particular types of scratches and bruises on the hands and face area, in his learned opinion, stem from someone fighting, either forcing a bag over his head or him fighting to get it off, or both. And he said that in his professional opinion, he is 99.9% sure that he was asphyxiated by the plastic bag and the duct tape covering his mouth. Then they take a break for everybody to compose themselves. And then we come back with Wood talking about pictures now of 𝗠𝗨's remains. And remember, she was in pieces, partially burned, distributed among several bags. She was even her skull was even in a partially melted bucket. So these were very gruesome pictures. And then he starts talking about how she was spread, through multiple layers of bags. He talked about how he looked at all the bones. He described each bone, the femur, the skull, how he tested those, and how they were discovered. He also talked about how he cleaned it up to be able to do the examination. They showed both the pictures when he got the bodies and the remains, and then after he started taking it apart to do his testing. He said that the one thing that traumatized him the most was the melted green bucket. It contained skull, some other soft tissue, some organs, and it was just, yeah. And then they go over how they were able to identify her through her dental records because she still had most of the teeth in the skull. And then they show the heart and lungs. He says the heart and lung, that this isn't what a heart and lung typically look like. They are partially burned. They've shrank from lack of moisture. And then he points out that they're honestly about a quarter of the size they normally would be. And that, yeah, definitely. Then they show more bones. And then they show pictures of the fire pit where all this was located. I apologize. This is hard to get through. These notes are hard to get through. And then he talked about some of the whole bones, as well as there was a lot of crumbly pieces of bones. And remember, the law enforcement have already testified that they had an anthropologist there who was able to determine that these were human remains as opposed to animal remains because it was taken out of the pet cemetery. He said that after the autopsy, his lab collected and cleaned the remains. All the bones were sent to the FBI for a detailed forensic anthropology report. Wood asked if the report contributed to Warren's decision on 𝗙𝗪𝗁's cause of death. Remember, with JJ being that he was intact and the bag was there, and that the lungs showed they had been asphyxiated, it was easier for Warren to determine the cause of death. Because 𝗙𝗪 was in pieces, he waited on the FBI's forensic reporting before he made the determination. He said he took all of that into account, and then he eventually came up with what we've already talked about, which was she was unspecified homicide. She was obviously killed and disposed of by somebody else, but they could not determine an exact cause of death. But Warren is leaning toward asphyxiation because that's how JJ died. And he's pretty well, he didn't see any other evidence of blunt force trauma, a gunshot, a stab wound. So he's leaning toward asphyxiation, but it is still unspecified homicide. And Rob Wood now tenders the witness. So now John Pryor will conduct cross-examination. He begins immediately by asking if he noticed that there were any canine bites on 𝗙𝗪's remains. He said he did not notice, but left that up to the anthropologist. Pryor then asked if he can determine when bruises were caused on body. He says he can get a rough idea based on the hemorrhaging and the drying of the blood. Pryor asked Warren how tall 𝗙𝗪 was, and then he said it was hard to get her exact height and weight because she was in pieces. So he's not a forensic anthropologist, so he can't answer the question. Pryor is trying to allude to the fact that some of these remains were animal remains, not 𝗙𝗪, but an anthropologist, which I'm sure is coming up in testimony at some point, determined these are human remains, these are animal remains. You know, somebody that studies that would know that. They do confirm that the autopsies were done on June 11th, 2020, about 2 days after the bodies were found on June 9th. And Pryor asked about the term heavy lungs. Warren said that is used when there is pulmonary edema, which is what happens to the lungs when you are asphyxiated or deprived of oxygen. He said that it causes a lot of fluid in the lungs and causes the swelling and heaviness of the lungs. Wood objects to this, saying, what's the point? We've already determined that the cause of death for both Tammy and JJ was pulmonary edema, and Boyce does sustain that objection. Pryor asked then if the remains were significantly smaller than if 𝗙𝗪 had been alive at the time. And Warren says that's a question again for a forensic anthropologist. Warren said it's very common in fire-related death when the organs are charged, they shrink and lose weight. And Pryor has no further questions. Wood does a very quick follow-up asking about the bruises. He asked if bruises could be considered a form of trauma. Warren says absolutely. Wood asks if given the condition of J.J. Vallow, Warren would be surprised to see bruising on J.J.'s body. He said in a case like this, the bruising would be significant, which it was. And then there's about a 10-minute sidebar. And then there is some discussion about an electronic exhibit. So they're trying to get that ready. So they take another break, about 20 minutes. And then the next witness called by the prosecution is Chandler Police Detective 𝗟𝗟𝗀𝗽. Lindsay Blake is questioning her, and she is part of the robbery and homicide investigation unit. She explains her training, and that mostly she was in charge of cell phone records and obtaining those through warrant and helping with the investigation of those. Wither was working on the day 𝗟𝗲𝗃 was shot. He wasn't on the robbery homicide team at that point. He joined it a few months later. She was invited to go out on a call as a training opportunity, and much of the time was observing but not specifically handling the investigation. Werther did look at the cell phone records that belonged to 𝗟𝗲𝗃. He inspected the records from T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, as well as the GPS location of that from 𝗟𝗲𝗃's phones, or all the numbers associated with 𝗟𝗲𝗃. He said that he used a data analysis tool to analyze the records. Werther says the call detail records would usually indicate the cell tower and the sector of towers that were used during a text call or email. They use a software called 𝗧𝗏𝗡, but it's now called TraxX. Werther explains that the phone records are from 4 devices, and then they show those up on the screen. There's over 120 slides with embedded recordings. So the first shows all of the 4 phone numbers associated to Charles. And then they show the another slide, which is a Chandler Police Department summary of 𝗟𝗲𝗃's shooting, basically shot in self-defense by brother-in-law. And then they played the 911 call, which came in at about 8:36 a.m. on July 11th, 2019. Then they talk about the first T-Mobile phone number of the 4 phone numbers, and that was a phone used by Lori Vallow. There were no logs of text messages received from that particular line. The next slide is the Verizon phone attributed to Alex Cox, and then the next slide shows the AT&T number to Chad Daybell. The phone tied to Chad had communication to Lori on July 11th. They showed a spreadsheet of all of the locations extracted from Charles's phone that day, and they are presented in color-coded. Basically, they're showing kind of a synopsis of what happened that day. And so basically it shows Charles is being at a True by Hilton hotel the night before the shooting, and then shows the distance from that hotel to the home where he was going to pick up JJ. And then another set of data shows Lori's movements from the home to Burger King and then to JJ's school. And then around the time that the call came in at 8:36 a.m., it shows very plainly that Lori went to Burger King, Walgreens, and then took JJ to school. And while Charles went basically from his hotel to the house to get JJ. And then they show that Lori texted Chad about 6:12, and that he texted her back at 7:01. At 7:16, Charles' device was seen traveling from Hilton to the home, and then he arrived at the home at 7:32. And then Charles has texted Lori at 7:33. He does not have the content of those messages, only that they happened. And then, according to them, until 7:50 a.m., Charles's device was around the home there in the Four Peaks area of Chandler. It was in about then in transit for about 46 minutes before the 911 call occurred. Lori had Charles's phone, and police recovered it from her. So basically, she left. She had his phone. It was in the car with her, and that's how they pinged where she was going from Burger King to Walgreens to the school. And then they break for lunch, and then we come back with Blake continuing to question Werther. They then discuss a slide that shows where the device was at the time an event happened. At 7:52 a.m., there was a voice call between Lori and Alex's phones. After the shooting, Alex and 𝗠𝗏 communicated phone. This is one of the few phone calls they had, and this was just before the 911 call. So Alex called 𝗠𝗏 after he shot Charles before he called 911. And then they show CCTV camera footage from the Burger King of 𝗠𝗏 going through the drive-thru with 𝗙𝗏 and JJ in the car. And then that shows that this is corroborated by both the timestamp on the CCTV and then the Charles's phone being at the Burger King's location at 7:55 a.m. And then he went where they went to Burger King and compared the timestamps versus the cell phone data, and that we see the red Kia Sorento, which approximates that 𝗠𝗏 was at Burger King between 7:54 and 7:55 a.m. And then that shows a different angle of CCTV showing that the vehicle was leaving Burger King, turning towards the Walgreens. And then she made a brief stop there to buy some flip-flops. They said that Charles' device arrived at the Walgreens about 8:08, and that it was there from 8:08 to 8:16. And then by this point, still, there has been no 911 call made. So Alex called 𝗠𝗏 just before 8, probably told her he shot Charles, and she's just going about her merry business, going to Burger King, going to Walgreens. And then we show that 𝗠𝗏 leaves Walgreens about 8:20, and then there were no CCTV footage entered into evidence showing her in the Walgreens. And then they end up at JJ's school, the Lawrence Life Academy. And then it was at the school until 8:32. And then the call from Alex Cox was made 63 minutes after Charles's device, his phone, first arrived at the Four Peaks home. And then 𝗠𝗏 and the phone arrived back at the house at 8:49 a.m. This is, of course, after the 911 call and after police and medical personnel are already on the scene. And then, of course, we have the body cam footage of what happened with 𝗙𝗏 and 𝗠𝗏 that day, and that they were both wearing the flip-flops that had just been purchased at Walgreens. Charles's device received an incoming call from Melanie Boudreau at 10:25, and then the phone was at the police station where they were questioning 𝗠𝗏 and 𝗙𝗏. Alex on that day missed a call from Summer, which is his sister, but he was at the police station at that time. Then we see a map showing that Chad's device was in the Salt Lake City area at 12:39 p.m. that day. He texted 𝗠𝗏, but there again, no messages were available. This is just what happened. It's just the action. And then, unfortunately, the computer freezes, and all of these exhibits can't be shown. So rather than waste time, they decide they're going to remove 𝗠𝗏 from the stand with recalling him later. And then they're going to call the next witness to not delay the trial. So Tara Martinez, who is an Idaho State Police forensic scientist, is put on the stand, and that she processes evidence to compare fingerprints, and she responds to crime scenes. She has worked in that capacity for 8 years. They talk about would ask her about latent prints. These are prints that are left unintentionally when people touch things, and they are normally not easy to see and have to be processed. So they're not like your hand sweeps over something, even though you're not gripping it, and that leaves a latent print. So they have to have special foaming agent that they use in the lab to bring those out. And she goes through all of that, the powder, the dyeing process, the foaming process to get those latent prints. She talks about how she was given samples from Alex Cox, a fingerprint card of all 10 fingerprints of him from the Gilbert Police Department, and also from his own autopsy before he was cremated. And then she compared those with any prints they were able to lift from JJ's remains. And particularly, there was a match of one of Alex Cox's fingerprints on the duct tape that was surrounding JJ's body. So it was his right little finger, and it was on not only the duct tape, but the black plastic that JJ's body was wrapped in. So Alex had touched those things. Then they show a imprint of what appears to be a palm. He said that was Alex. She said that was Alex Cox's print, and it was also on JJ's person, as well as there were some hairs and other fibers that could be attributed to Alex Cox as well. And then they tendered the witness. Pryor cross-examines and asks Martinez if plastic is a good conduit for fingerprints. She says yes, it's a very good surface for latent prints because it's non-porous and they stick. She said she was able to find Alex's fingerprints and part of his handprints on the plastic wrap and the duct tape. And then, of course, she found some of his hairs. Pryor asked how many hairs Martinez collected. She said she doesn't recall how many, but they are in her notes. And she does look at her notes and then answers the question. And then she said that there were at least 25 to 50 hairs that were found. Now, it's typical that a human person can lose up to 50 hairs a day. So he asked about DNA. She says she doesn't necessarily do anything with DNA. She's all about handprints and fibers, body droppings that can link you to a crime. And then we go to another 20-minute break. They are back. They are putting Detective Werther back on the stand as they have the slideshow issues fixed. And they go to the slideshow that shows the mapping of a voice call from Lori's phone to Chad's phone. It was 1 minute and 45 seconds. And then they show Alex Cox's device was in the same area as Charles Vallow's device between 12:57 and 12:59 p.m. Chad's device texted Lori at 1:11, and Charles' device went to Alex's home at 1:26 p.m. This is, of course, the fact that Lori still had Charles' phone. So she was going to Alex's home. And then they show some more text between Lori, or text data between Chad and Lori, and that Melanie Boudreau called Lori Vallow and talked for about 5 minutes. And then Lori's phone called Detective Yakin's desk that afternoon. Lori's device missed a call from Colby Ryan, and then she called the Valley of the Sun mortuary. That call lasted 9 minutes and 39 seconds. And then there was ongoing texting between Lori and Chad. It's like they don't have any of the contents, just that it happened. And then at 2:24, Chad's device texted Lori's device. And then Lori texted him back. And then they showed that Alex's device called the detective back. Melanie's device called Lori. And then some more communication between Charles and Lori's devices and Melanie's devices. So she was using Charles' phone. And then finally at 2:52, that is when detectives took possession of Charles's phone, and it remained with the Chandler Police Department. At 4:02, there was a call from Alex's device to Lori's device, and then more texts and calls between Lori and Chad. And then Chad Daybell's phone called the Valley of the Sun mortuary at 7:34, and the call lasted 7 minutes. We've all heard the recording of that and the testimony of the mortuary staff that he was trying to assist Lori in funeral arrangements. And then they detailed more of the text messages going between Blake rests her case, with tenders the witness, and Pryor cross-examines. He asked about the history of the phone correspondence between Chad and Lori. Wither said he did not look at the history. He just focused on what happened that day. Pryor asked if he knew that they were having an affair. He said he is aware of that now. And would it be unusual for them to text back and forth if they were involved? He said no, not at all. But again, there was a lot of communication going out between a lot of people. And that then Pryor asked about poor reception. Could that affect where things were triggering? And he says not enough to put it outside the time frame that we're talking about. It just wouldn't go through. So the fact that they have the data is that it went through. And then Pryor asked about the Burger King video. He says there appeared to be 3 people in the car. And he said, yes, it was most likely 𝗙𝗪, JJ, and Lori. Pryor has no further questions. Blake does a quick redirect. She follows up by asking about the poor reception issue. And again, that is where they reiterate that if there was a poor service issue, they wouldn't have the data. So it would just be like a quick 1-second drop, that they have the data, so it went through. And then Blake has nothing further. Werther is released, and we end for the day. I will be back tomorrow, Friday, May 10th, with what happened today. Thursday, May 9th, in the Chad Daybell case. And until next time, you don't cry.